Is it possible for there to be federal legislation that can prevent this? I mean, on some level, it feels like the Constitution already does. It's just that, like, on the ground, it is much harder. So, like, for instance, even in the context of New York State, you pass this law, it feels like there's still local jurisdictions where this could go on. Ad infinitum unless there is like some type of, I don't know, some type of apparatus that is set up, either, a governmental one or, an NGO that is going around to jurisdictions to make sure this is not happening. Because, if I'm a single mother and, I'm having to struggle to make ends meet, I probably am not aware of, like, well, like you said with Killman, like you should take the lawyer. They'll waive the fee. I mean, there's probably, I'm just caught up trying to do the right thing and have no idea whether I'm, in the process of, like, uniquely being targeted or not.
So the place to fix the problem is both in the courts and in the legislative arena. And there is a bill in Congress, Jerry Nadler from New York in the House and Brian Schatz, senator from Hawaii, have sponsored a bill that creates incentive funds for states that do what Senator Salazar is trying to do in New York, getting rid of the fines and fees. So it will create it similar to the way Congress creates incentives for creating highway safety laws. We'll give you more money for your highways if you make them safer. This is a similar sort of idea. If you get rid of your fines and fees, the federal government, hopefully, if this bill goes anywhere, will provide some federal grants to help you replace that funding for a period of time while you figure out what to do. The other way that there is progress being made is through the courts. So in Missouri and Idaho, for instance, there were class action lawsuits brought on behalf of defendants who were being put back in jail because they couldn't afford to pay their fines and fees. And in both Idaho and Missouri, two conservative states, where local circuit judges were putting poor people back in jail to collect fines and fees, the Supreme Courts in both Idaho and Missouri ruled unanimously that you can't do this. This is wrong. This is against the law. It's unconstitutional. It's debtor's prison. And so there's progress being made there in the courts. But again, that's slow. That's a year or two long case in one state and a second state. There are federal lawsuits in South Carolina and Oklahoma about these schemes. There are other lawsuits being filed by these similar organizations in a variety of places. But what you really have to do is you have to upend the entire fines and fees schemes. We have to decide as a country that we're not going to use the courts and use the police as a fundraising tool, because the result is poor people end up spending a lot of time in jail, and it has a negative impact on their communities. It has a negative impact on economies. It doesn't do anything to improve public safety. This is a problem that is so massive. It's going to take state by state legislation. I'm really hopeful that the New York bill passes. In this country, we tend to have, sort of a situation where folks in Missouri pay attention to what happens in New York and California, and hopefully eventually, they make their way to flyover land. But here it's sort of happening the opposite way too. You have Missouri and Idaho Supreme Courts recognizing that this is a problem, and hopefully more and more people starting to realize we should not be using our courts and our judges and our police and our prosecutors all as part of this process to just collect money from poor people. And to fix it, we got to have judges do the right thing. They need to have ability to pay hearings. They need to waive fees. They need to make sure that nobody's waiving the right to an attorney. Then we have to have legislatures stop adding new fines and fees on top of the ones that already exist. Or go the next step further and get rid of the underlying fines and fees. There is a long process that is going to take to unravel this scheme. And in the meantime, unfortunately, a whole lot of folks are going to face debtor's prison until we can do something to fix it.
Last question. So, I mean, it's clear. I mean, this may not even be relevant relative to what the solution is. I mean, you've walked through, exactly what needs to happen to end these practices. But from your reporting, is it your sense that this is about a way of generating revenue, or is there like some type of, this story of you owe whatever it was, $750, and I'll put you in jail for $50 a day. You'll work it off, I guess. That to me just sounds like a weird, just like some type of moral punishment for being poor. Like, is this apparatus more about punishing and policing poor people than it is ultimately about making money for the town or whatever it is?
I don't know the answer to that. In the book, I asked Jill Webb. Jill Webb is one of the attorneys, former public defender, who ended up filing the lawsuit on behalf of Kenny Killman. And she discovered this scheme similar to me. She just was representing these folks in the public defender's office and kept finding out they had these cases where they were just in jail because they owed money. And she went to the jail one day and just started interviewing people and found out that almost everybody there was there because they owed money. And she became committed to trying to undo this scheme. And I asked her one day, I said, Jill, do they know what they're doing here? Or is this just one of these things that sort of like the boiling of the frog that takes place over a long period of time and it becomes ingrained in the system? And she said, Tony, I think a lot of the folks involved in these schemes just hate poor people. And I don't know that that's the case all over the country. I don't know that every one of the judges that I wrote about that put somebody in debtor's prison, every one of the lawmakers who passed one of these laws, I don't know that they all hate poor people, but I cover a lot of legislative movement in the country and in Missouri in particular. And there's a lot of legislation that looks at poor people like second-class citizens. And so I think that's part of the problem. I think we have a cultural problem where we don't believe that everybody's civil rights are worth the same that my civil rights are worth. Somehow mine are worth more because I make more money than the person who lives a few blocks away. And so that's a complicated problem that gets beyond the Constitution and state law and appropriate actions by judges. It gets to the underlying issues that we have in our country. Do we love and care for our fellow man and believe that they have the same rights that all of us have? That's the question I ask at the end of the book that I hope readers ultimately ask themselves is, do the civil rights of people like Kendi Killman and Brooke Bergen and Sasha Darby, are they worth less than your rights because they happen to be poor? And I know how I answer that question. I don't know how ultimately our state lawmakers and public officials who are going to have to fix this problem answer the question. Jill Webb seems to think that a lot of them just really don't believe that poor people should have the same rights as the rest of us. And I hope we can get beyond that as a country if that's the case.
Tony Messenger, Metro columnist for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, author of Profit and Punishment, How America Criminalizes the Poor in the Name of Justice. We'll put a link to that at majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Really illuminating and disturbing. Appreciate it.
Thank you.